Hey everybody, it's Susie Q. Can you hear me? I know I'm late. I'm having a hard time starting, so I'm not even sure if I'm live. You have to let me know. I'm going to be reading the comments to see if you guys can hear me. Oh, yay! Okay, so you guys know what's coming. I might be late, but here it is.
Hey everybody, it's Susie Q and I'm here to show you just what I do. I have a passion for fish and exotics too, so come along with me, it's Susie Q. Hey everybody, it's Susie Q and I'm here to show you just what I do. I got a passion for fish and exotics too, so come along with me, it's Susie Q. Hey everybody, it's Susie Q and I'm here to show you just what I do. I have a passion for fish and exotics too, so come along with me, it's Susie Q. Hey everybody, it's Susie Q. Hey everybody, it's Susie Q. Nah, hey everybody, it's Susie Q, so come along with me. Said I'm Susie Q.
So, good evening, everybody, and welcome to my stream. How is everybody? Oh, look at everybody's in the chat. How is everybody tonight? I am so excited for tonight's live stream because I have a special guest and I'm so silly excited. So I'm going to introduce him, but I'm really going to let him introduce himself. And then once he's introduced, I'm going to go through the chat and we can ask him questions. This is, let me introduce to you, Supreme Gecko. Hey, Wally.
Hi, Susie. Can you see
Everybody?
me?
Yeah, I see you just fine and I hear you. This is
Excellent. Well,
awesome.
I think we're done with this. It's a success.
We have success. We can finish now.
We can finish now.
Oh, I
I'm
had
Wally.
such a hard time logging on this the time, guys. I don't know what happened.
Well, I'm glad it worked. We tested yesterday, and just like anything, it worked perfect yesterday, and today it doesn't. But we're there.
Yep. So I
Uh,
don't know if everybody in my audience, almost everybody, is a fish tuber. Some people have some other extra hobbies as well. So maybe you'd want to introduce yourself a little bit and who you are and where you come from.
Absolutely. And I'm going to start way back. I actually started this whole thing as a fisherman. When I was a kid, we moved out on a lake and I started fishing as a recreation activity. And that led me to be closer to nature. We lived right on the lake, so it was just perfect. And from there, I started keeping fish in fish tanks. So I had a little tent in my bedroom and I had a couple of bluegills and bass. And it was just a perfect learning experience. I wanted to learn more about the animals so that I could improve my fishing. So I graduated high school, college, moved up to Milwaukee, lived in a little town south of Milwaukee, moved up to Milwaukee, got married. All my fish tanks went to the side, stored in my parents' house. After a year or so of being in Milwaukee, they called me up and said, "Hey, do you want these fish tanks?" I said, "No, don't bring them up here." And sure enough, the next weekend, they brought all the fish tanks up to Milwaukee and loaded them. And I thought to myself, well, I'll just throw them out. But I kept the fish tanks and I actually started keeping fish, more
Ooh.
tropical fish though. My first pair was a pair of crebenzas, and I had a pair of crebenzas. They bred, so I had to get another tank. And better than anybody, once you have two tanks, two aquariums together, those tanks are going to be breed faster than the fish. So that little apartment, that little one-bedroom apartment in Milwaukee, we had the two fish tanks that turned into, I don't even know how many fish tanks, maybe 20 in a one-bedroom apartment. So we bought a house after living in the apartment for a couple of years. And when we looked for houses, my wife, Nanette, would look at the kitchen and the bedrooms, the bathroom, and I would be patiently waiting and waiting. And okay, now let's go downstairs to the basement. So we found a house that had part of it was unfinished, part of it was finished. And I I grabbed the unfinished part and made it my fish room. So I know that people are waiting to hear about geckos and isopods, but I have a history with fish, and that led me into keeping other animals too. So that area in the basement that I took over, I had in my time, and this is going back 25, 30 years ago, and that just shows I'm about 128. Um, but back then, I turned that little area in the basement into about 125 tanks. Smallest were little killifish tanks. Biggest, most of my tanks were mostly about 50 gallons, and it doesn't seem like I could fit that many into a small area, but I worked as a computer programmer, so I knew Excel and I knew how to do formulas and how to fit just every single inch of that space that I had available into another fish tank. So my biggest fish tank was 125, where I had discus, and I kept everything from guppies to killifish to apistogrammas to discus to tropheus to the featherfin African cichlids.
Ooh.
I really like the cichlids. Wasn't too much into tetras. Loved the rainbows. Really got into the rainbows too. So that was a prior life. And from our chat yesterday, you know this, Susie, but there came a point where we had some health issues in the family with one of our children, and I really didn't spend I couldn't spend a lot of time in the fish room. Came down, fed, but at that time I had 4 different tanks of discus going at one time, breeding, and all 4 of them had babies that they were nursing.
Oh, wow.
And when we had that issue with the one son, I really couldn't spend a lot of time, and I went down one day, and pretty much all the discus were laying on their sides, and I lost all the babies. And at that point, I had to make that decision whether I wanted to do fish full time or take off with my computer career, and decided that the family was way more important. And I knew I couldn't do both the computer career and the fish. And I'm not really a gambler, and I'm very kind of laid back. So I gave up the fish and sold all of the fish tanks, 125 fish tanks, a half horse blower. Everything went like one weekend. I sold everything. So I'll continue with this story because it leads somewhere. Um, so I got out of fish about 10 or 15 years later. I really had that fire again. So I had one fish tank, but I knew that keeping one, it would lead more to what I had before, and I just didn't want to go down that road yet. So I visited a friend in California that had chameleons. He had this beautiful big cage of chameleons, and I thought they were so cool. When I got back home, I set up some enclosures for chameleons. I know that's the worst reptile to start
Yeah.
your experience with, but I had a ton of success with Vales and Jackson chameleons, if any of your fans know what these are. And I actually got into panther chameleons and had just some beautiful, beautiful
Oh, my
animals.
favorite.
And that led me down to keep leopard geckos, crested geckos, and then just recently, and this is about 20 years of reptile keeping, just recently I've gotten into isopods, which are really cool.
Yeah.
That's a pretty long story. Sorry about that.
No, I love it. I love it. I don't think it was too long at all. I like getting a little history and from where you came because I've been watching your channel for a while because I'm trying to breed isopods and I have crested geckos and I put 2 crested geckos in the same tank and are trying to breed them. And so I had a lot of that going on. So I started reaching out to other channels besides just the fish community. And I really liked yours. Yours and you and your wife have a nice rhythm going. And so I really like that. Is your
Well,
wife
thank you
there?
for
She want to say hi?
Nanette. You want to come over and say hi? You've got to come in front of the camera. You have to
Oh,
come
did
in
I
front of
call her out? I'm sorry, Nanette.
Hi.
There she
I don't
is.
think so. Just hi.
Hi, Nanette. I should have given her a heads up. I'm sorry.
That's fine. I told you earlier, Susie, I might be on social media a lot and doing these videos with Nanette's help, but it's pretty much Nanette that runs the show.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty cool, though. That's pretty cool. And that you give her credit for it. You don't sit there and take all the credit for it. I like
Well,
that.
I take the credit, but she's in the room. So
That's too funny. So, did you get a chance to see my video on how I built my isopod enclosures? Did I do it correctly?
I did, and you did. Let me explain isopods just for a moment, because probably a lot of your fans have either not heard about what an isopod is, or their experience with an isopod is going out to the yard, overturning a piece of wood or something,
The little roly
and see
polies, yeah.
little little roly polies, little, they call them wood lice.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bunch of different names for them, but they're real cute. They're fun. Pill bugs, sow bugs. They're real cute and all, but I think a lot of people don't understand why somebody would keep isopods. And there's just hundreds of different species and color morphs and sizes. So first I'll explain why I'm keeping isopods, or why people should or do keep isopods. And the best analogy that I could come up with was, I don't know if any of your fans or you keep shrimp. Do you think anybody are keeping those little red shrimp? I found recently that these shrimp are just huge in the hobby.
Yes, they are. The Neocaridina and the Caridina shrimp. I keep a mono shrimp because I have a very hard time growing the other shrimp, but a mono shrimp and ghost shrimp I have no problems with.
So some of these shrimp, there's different care requirements.
Absolutely. I have different water parameters. Yeah,
And why do you think people are keeping the shrimp? Why do you keep the shrimp?
I keep the Amanos to help me with some of the algae. They're like a cleanup crew, but a lot of people keep shrimp just because they're absolutely adorable and they're fascinating to watch and they're fun to breed. And it's just a nice addition to a tank. And if you have a nano tank, it's like there's not a huge bio load when you add the shrimp. And they don't really get overrun because if you have a guppy or two in there, they snack on the babies. Am I allowed to say that? Snack on the babies are here and there. So you won't have too many. I think that's why I keep them. And I know some people in here keep. Look at Tater Salad said he's a shrimp nerd. So we do have a lot of. Oh, so Select Peck says so. Isopods are the shrimp of the reptile world.
Yes, yes, exactly. They exactly are. So I'll tell a real quick story of why I keep isopods. About 2 or 3 years ago, I had gotten completely out of the hobby, the gecko hobby, and Nanette did all of the care downstairs, keeping the animals going, because I was working like 80 hours a week at work, and it just was, for a couple of years, it was impossible to keep everything going. When I got back into the hobby a couple of years ago, it was at a time where the geckos, and geckos are my main passion, but the geckos weren't breeding. It was the fall, everything was cooling down. I didn't expect any eggs. So I would go downstairs and I'd put food in the tanks and just wait, and knowing that I had the whole winter to wait and the whole springtime to see any babies. So I wanted something going on downstairs. So I had kept a couple of isopods years and years ago as a cleanup crew. And most people start with isopods as
Mm-hmm.
a cleanup crew.
Yeah, that's me.
They Exactly. They help in a bioactive enclosure. They clean up the poop. They clean up dead leaves. They clean up dead roots from plants. They keep everything clean. So that's one reason why somebody would keep isopods. And that's why I kept them years and years ago.
That's
But
actually the
then,
only reason I know of to have them.
but then, I got back into the hobby and I wanted something breeding right away. So I started keeping some isopods, and I kept 2 or 3 colonies going, and all of a sudden I was getting babies. Just like probably some people keep shrimp and start seeing babies, and it's like, oh my God, this
Yeah.
is the coolest thing
Yeah.
in the world to see these little babies run. I've got to have more. I have to have different ones. I have to have a different color. So cleanup crew, you can feed isopods to other reptiles. I've tried it and it works pretty well, just like,
Really?
shrimp. Yes, absolutely. Um, Cleanup crew, you can feed them. They're very cute. They breed, a lot of them breed very quickly. They don't take up a lot of space. Um, and they're great pets in that there's so many variety of isopods.
Uh-huh.
So when I got into it about 2 years ago, I had 2 or 3 groups in the summer. By the fall, I probably had 30 or 40 different types of isopods. And now I have probably oh, I would have to say 50 or 60 different
Oh,
species.
wow.
So yeah, so I have about 100 tubs of
That's pretty
isopods.
cool.
It is. It's a lot of fun. It doesn't take a lot of work. I go in maybe twice a week. If I miss, a feeding, it's not that big of a deal, and I'll talk about that a little bit in a second.
Okay.
But if I miss a feeding, once a week, I throw some food in, I put some water in, and that's really all that you have to do. Of course, I have to look around to make sure there's babies and enjoy the experience from keeping these isopods. But so when I started, I had a hard time finding information. There weren't many good YouTube videos. There really wasn't a lot of information on the internet about specifics about isopods, just general information. So I kept asking, found a couple of good channels and asked a lot of questions. That's why I started my YouTube channel, was mainly to give more information about keeping these isopods. But there's only really two or three very, very critical things to keep isopods. Number one is that you have to have a moisture gradient somewhere in the enclosure. A lot of them, 90% of them, want a moist area and want a very defined dry area. And if anybody keeps reptiles, they know that a lot of reptiles need that heat gradients where they can get warm and then go off and cool down. Kind of the same thing with isopods. They're a crustacean, they're not a bug. So they need that area where they can go to hydrate and actually breathe and drink, the water in the area. So that's probably the main criteria. A lot of people just use dirt and some components for the substrate, and then a piece of cork bark or decaying wood in the enclosure for them to get up and under, just like we go to the garden and overturn a log and find isopods. Same thing in captivity. You need something where they can get in between the dirt and that log. And then the final thing really is you need dried leaves. And that's really it. Now, a lot of people feed different things like shrimp and dried fish, and I have actually a food Supreme Isopod chow, and I feed that. But if you have the wood, you have the leaves, and the moisture gradients, you're doing pretty okay. So looking at your enclosures, I really like how you set them up. Make sure that you have a moisture gradients. Make sure you just have a ton of dried leaves in there. And if you can put some decaying wood, and when I say decaying wood, it's wood that you can just kind of literally flake off with your finger.
I put in
That's what,
hard bark wood. It wasn't very. Ah,
and everybody does it. I did it when I started out. I probably set up 20 containers with cork bark in every single one,
yeah.
and maybe had some wood that I collected from going outside and looking for isopods.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that was being eaten up more than the leaves and more than the cork bark. So I started researching on that and found it's a huge benefit to the isopods to have a little piece of decaying wood.
Okay. Awesome. I know you were talking on one of your streams or one of your videos because on the bottom of Sophie, which is my parrot PlayStation, I get these dust-free wood pellets. And I think you talked about putting some pellet parts or something like that in your enclosure. Is that the same kind of
I
pellets
did.
that I get?
I did exactly. And I just mentioned three or four very critical requirements, but then you can improve your enclosures too by putting orchid bark in the substrate.
Okay.
You can put charcoal in the substrate to give them areas where they can get up under the substrate and hide.
Okay.
And just like you're saying, these wood pellets, I don't know if any of your fans have gone to one of the home improvement stores and gotten the 30 or 40 pound bag of hickory wood pellets that you throw into your grill, light it, and you
Oh,
get that flavor. If you can find them untreated, obviously, unflavored, and I just throw them into a big plastic container, throw some water in there, let it sit for a few hours, and it breaks up so that then I can take those pellets. Now it's more like sawdust than anything. Hardwood is what you want.
oh.
And then I can throw a little handful of that into the substrate. That will actually eventually break down into more of a decayed wood type of thing so that substrate will last longer and longer and longer.
Oh, very interesting. Now, Zen Ginger
Although
has a
that,
good question. She says, so are isopods good for outside plants too, like orchids and greenhouses? And can she get some and disperse them outside, or is that a no-no? Is that like we know in the fish keeping
Up
hobby you can't
any
release any of your fish out into the wild? Is it the same with isopods?
Well, we've got our culture. If I'm understanding correctly, we have our cultures inside. We never take them out. There's a lot of just different cultures. I don't want to mix them up. I don't want to put them outside because I probably won't be able to collect them in the future. So what I do is I'll go outside and I'll collect some isopods and put them in an enclosure and keep them inside and watch them develop and see if I can get different colors from those isopods.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Now, Blake's
If that makes
Aquatics
sense.
said it's a good idea to put them in a dry start method aquascape to keep down the fungus and mold. And I think he's talking more about the springtails. So do you grow
Yeah,
springtails? Because for some reason in my head, I got springtails and isopods kind of go together. They kind of do the complete job of the cleanup crew.
a lot of people do that. I do that because isopods are a cleanup crew. Sometimes you can throw too much, so you actually need a cleanup crew for the cleanup crew. So springtails work wonderfully well to break down any uneaten food. So I'll normally put in a vegetable and a powder in their enclosure again once a week or so. And usually they'll go through it pretty quick, but those springtails will clean up anything else in there. They work great for that.
Okay. So we have a lot of questions here, so I'm going to keep throwing it up there. Select Pet asked, so can you keep different kinds of isopods, or do they crossbreed, like with the native ones in the wild that we find out inside, or do you got to keep them separate?
They do and they don't. So just like any other, fish, you can't breed multifacetatus. Is it still Lamprologus multifacetatus?
Yes.
You can't breed a shell dweller multifacetatus to a Lamprologus brevis. You can't do that. But you can breed a beautiful golden brevis to another brevis that doesn't look that way, and through line breeding, you can
Okay.
get maybe some that look golden and some that look normal, but maybe one or two that look even better than mom or dad.
Okay.
And then you can take those and breed them in a group and get better and better and better results. So there's a lot of spots to get that color that you possibly can with some of the weird mutations. Like I can go out and it's just such a variant in colors. I can selectively pick out two or three, breed them together to try to make more
Oh,
orange or more yellow in
okay.
that isopod. Species wise, they don't cross, but they do form different colors and sizes and shapes.
Okay. Does they gotta kind of have to be in the same classification?
Exactly. So
Okay.
there's just a ton of different genuses, and there's a lot of genuses and just a ton of different species, and usually those species will not cross.
Okay.
And
Now,
even saying that, there's some color forms of those genuses that I'll give you a real quick example. In Spain, you can find Porcelio scaber normal grays, and you can find Porcelio scaber orange, called giant orange, Spanish orange. But this has been tried to breed those two to see if you can get a different variation, and they don't breed together, even
oh,
though they're the same species. So it's a little weird that way.
well, if I was orange, I don't know if I'd want to breed with gray, you know. Just kidding.
Yeah,
I
us
know,
orange people
right?
stick to
Now,
ourselves. We're
Barbara
just that high
Jackson.
level class.
Barbara Jackson asked, "Does it matter if the decaying wood is softwood like pine or hardwood like oak?"
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you very much for the question. You really want to work with hardwood as much as possible. The oak, maple, spruce. You really want to work with leaves that come from those trees,
Okay.
and you want to work with hardwood that comes from those trees. So, being the cheapskate that I am, I'll go out in the fall and I'll bag up well, my son does it for me, but we'll get like 20 of the black garbage bags full of leaves and we'll throw them into the garage and just let them sit the whole winter.
Okay.
I'll take trips around, parks in the neighborhood, and I'll collect big pieces of wood to set up an enclosure. But I look,
I think I lost you.
I got a call.
Oh, there you
You
go.
can grab if you want to see some ice.
Yeah. Do you have a culture nearby?
I think I lost her.
Did you hear me? I'm not sure if your
Susie, are
audio
you
went
still
out or did
there?
mine go out. Can you hear me?
I'm still here. Can you hear me?
I can. Yeah. Did you say you had a sample isopod culture in front of you?
Yeah, let me grab one for you just real quick.
Awesome. Awesome. Guys, isn't this great? I'm so excited. I'm so excited. Not that I like bugs a lot, but I need bugs in my life right now. So
Well, if you don't like bugs, I'll make sure that I bring out a couple of bugs later for you. Um, can you check the camera to make sure I'm holding this the right way? And we'll see if we can get this to work. So this group right here, and I'm going to hold this up and hopefully, can you
okay.
see it a little bit
Oh
higher?
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's good.
Like
Ah,
that? Okay.
yeah.
I'm
Hey,
going to
your
like
container
this
is
as long as
so
you can see.
large.
Well, this is a 15 quart, and sometimes I use 27 quarts for these because they breed so quickly. I'm going to lift up this wood, and again, this is cork bark, and you're going to see what's called an Armadillidium maculatum zebra. This
I
is a
love
zebra
the
isopod.
zebra. Oh, let's see.
So
Oh my
hopefully,
gosh.
does this show up on the camera?
Yes. Mine do not look anything like that. Let me, oh my gosh. Let me get my
Well,
zebra.
this is it. I can just see them falling off of here like rats off of a sinking ship. So I'm not going to hold this up much, but this is one of my several cultures going, and this was a tough one for me because when I got these in,
Wow.
I didn't do real well with them because I was misting the entire enclosure, and I found out that they don't like that. You only give them water
Do you see
on
the
the.
difference? I have three. You have 300.
Uh,
I
did
got
you count
three.
300 that quick?
Yeah,
That's pretty
yeah.
good. I don't know if
What am I doing wrong, man? What am I doing wrong?
No, you're not doing anything wrong. It's just a learning experience, Susie. And again, I lost
It's
so many when
little.
I started off, but I was misting the entire
I
enclosure.
do,
And
yeah.
I take a now what I do with them is I take a water bottle, and you can do that with most isopods. You can mist the entire enclosure to keep that humidity up, because again, they breathe, through the moisture. But if you can see this at all, only this part of the enclosure is moist. I have the sphagnum moss. Hopefully I can do this. Hopefully this is coming up. So I have the sphagnum moss
Uh-huh.
on one side. Only this part of the enclosure is wet.
Okay.
This is bone dry. The leaves are bone dry, obviously. I've got the cork bark in there. I have decaying wood underneath. I've actually mixed it in here. I have eggshells. A lot of people use cuttle bone, like for birds to chew on for the calcium. I
Yeah.
use eggshells. Again, I'm so cheap. I grind up the eggshells and put them in there. And I keep saying that, and people are going to believe that I am a real cheapskate. And maybe I am. But, um, I think once you set them up like this and do a couple of things right, they multiply just like crazy. And this absolutely isn't the fastest breeding isopod out there.
Okay, so since I have a so much smaller isopod container and I don't have a gradient moisture, should I redo my enclosures to be like longer and definitely like moister to drier?
As far as the smallest size enclosure I would use with any isopod, I would use a 6 quart. It's one of those tubs that you can go to Walmart or one of the home improvement stores and buy them for 99 cents a piece, a stack of 6 of them for $5 or $6.
Do you think this looks like
Uh,
6 quarts?
yeah, 6 quarts. They're just a small tub. Do I have a? It's a shoebox. Yeah, it's
Oh,
just
like a
a
shoebox.
little
Okay, yeah.
shoebox, and make sure you have the gradients.
I just
On
don't
one
think I did the
side.
gradient thing. I'm gonna have to redo this because the whole thing is moist.
Moisture is probably the one. As long as you have the leaves and the wood in the enclosure, the decaying wood and the leaves. Moisture is the big key with isopods.
Okay.
Some don't require, maybe the whole enclosure can be moist, like powder. If anybody knows what a powder blue is,
Mm-hmm.
zebras are pretty particular about their moisture content, and a lot of the more expensive. We didn't talk about money. I don't, I'll talk about money for just a second. Like the zebras go for about $2 a piece, $3 a piece. Um, some of these isopods you can find for 20 for $10.
Oh, okay.
Um, there's some though that are out there, and just let's go back to the shrimp example. I'm sure there's some shrimp out there that are
Oh.
probably 20, 25, 30,
Yep.
$35 a piece. So some of the bigger named isopods and the newer species, the newer ones that people are working with are around $35 to $50 a piece. And if you're starting with 10 to 12, which you really should, that's a chunk of change to drop on a culture of isopods.
Right. Well, that's why I started breeding them because every time I went to a reptile show, I would always get the dwarf white or the purple, something that was affordable. And the more I saw,
Yeah,
like my blue tongue skink will like chase them down and eat them. Whereas my bearded dragon
nice.
won't be bothered with the dwarf white because they're just too small for him to get off his butt and move around. So it depends on which one. But that was so expensive. I thought maybe it's kind of like my dubia roaches. Maybe if I could breed them, then it would be better. I didn't realize how much was going into breeding them.
And again, it's just a couple, it really is just a couple of tricks. I've got a couple of videos out there that show how to set up an enclosure. And if you follow those, and if you have a specific species that you're not sure how to set them up, because there's not much differences between the species. But if there's a specific species that you have that you want to know more about, I might have a video out there on that specific species, or just leave a comment. And I try to get back on comments on my videos in about a day.
Okay,
But
that's nice.
you're talking about shows. I breed a lot of geckos, and that's my main focus downstairs. That's what really is my passion. And I love the isopods, but I started doing these reptile shows, and my 2 8-foot tables would be filled with geckos, and then maybe a part of it, had some isopods. I'm selling out isopods like every show
I
when
bet.
we could do
I
reptile
bet. That's
shows.
a, that's the first table I go to. I get my springtails and isopods because even
There
though
you
people say they're so easy to breed, well, guess what? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, about 15 bioactive enclosures. So I always want to make sure, some enclosures keep breeding, other enclosures don't. And I bet you it has something to do with the gradual moisture inside the even bioactive enclosure. If it's all moist all the time, I might not be doing it like the right way. That's what I'm thinking.
Exactly. And every different species might have something a little bit different. Now, one thing that I do with dwarf whites and springtails is I keep a culture on the side, a culture or 2 or 3 or 10, depending on if I'm doing, the reptile shows with them and selling them. But I'll keep cultures on the side. So I'll have my bioactive going with springtails and dwarf whites and whatever. I actually have one with zebras in them. But then I keep the separate culture going so that when, if I see any issues with the enclosure not having enough springtails or dwarf whites, I can throw in another handful and keep it going that way.
Oh. So I do have a question on geckos.
Yes.
So, in your opinion, because I know you like leopard geckos and you have crescent geckos and you have gargoyle geckos, correct?
Yes.
What would be the one that you would think would be the easiest or easier for newbies to like? All my lights are going off. Easier for everybody to like not everybody, but if somebody wanted to get into the gecko world, what would be the one easy?
Well,
Because
I'll
I know
ask.
my opinion, but I don't know enough about all the other geckos.
Yeah, and we do so many reptile shows. That's probably the number one question that we get at reptile shows. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send this right back to you, and I'm going to ask you to ask your fans what did they think the easiest and really kind of beginner gecko is that people should start off with if they're thinking about getting into geckos. While you do that, and people put their comments and their guesses or their thoughts, I'm going to go ahead and grab a leopard gecko if
Oh,
you don't mind
great.
and bring
Thank
it
you. Yeah, because we got some
up.
people here that want to see some reptiles.
I've got a few.
Did that work for you, Bob? You guys are so funny. I'm trying not to react to the chat as I'm reading it, but there's some funny things and there's some real questions going on. It's like trying not to react is really hard.
And this is hard for me because I'm on the other side. I usually like to type in the funny stuff and read the funny stuff.
Oh, this is good. What do you have? Oh, look at the baby. What a beautiful
This,
leopard gecko.
thank you very much. So this is a leopard gecko. As I talked about the isopods before with the different morphs, this is a very specific morph. It's going to get away from me. The little girl's getting away from me. This is called a tan sun. It's an orange albino mixed with a carrot tail. If anybody knows what a carrot tail is, it has the extended orange in the tail. And this is the albino
Oh,
mixed with that. Just a
beautiful.
super gentle.
How old?
This one's probably about 6 years old. She's a
Okay.
female.
And how did you know it's a female? Like, are they easy to tell?
They are. And you might want to warn your viewers that we're going to get graphical here.
X rated,
But
guys.
X-rated, you're going to get banned from
I
YouTube
know,
for
right?
this.
That's okay.
So I can lift up the tail, and right at the base of the tail, if you see a very, very, very defined, I'm going to see if I can do this another way if she lets
Okay.
me. No, you don't want to do this at all.
She says, just trust that I'm a girl.
Yeah,
I
come
wouldn't want
on.
to
You
show
check.
my private parts
So
on YouTube either.
I'm going to hold her like this. Right at the base of the tail, if there's a distinct bulge, you can
Okay.
tell that that's male. And actually, I can tell males at around 3 to 4 months because they'll start developing pores around that area as well, just little indentation.
Okay. Oh, awesome. Everybody's
So
talking
leopard,
about your reptile, how beautiful she is.
oh, thank you very
Oh,
much.
nice. Now, the size of the tail. I have one that's got a big fat tail and the other one not so big. And somebody said she's not eating enough. Is that true? The size of the tail goes to how much they're eating?
It does. It's an indication, just like you can tell, Susie, with your fish, if a fish is sitting in the corner, it's sitting at the top of the tank. If you had two angelfish in the tank and one of them is sitting up at the top of the tank, and you know that it's a male and a female, or maybe you don't know if it's a male or a female. You come downstairs, you see two angelfish and one sitting at the top. I'm guessing immediately what's going on.
Yeah.
You probably know that fish sitting up here might be a male, might be the female, but this other fish is probably bullying the other fish. So you know to take it out.
Yeah.
Same exact thing with reptiles. If I have multiple animals in one enclosure and one of them just isn't eating, the indicator is that tail, especially with leopard geckos, especially with African fat like that. That tail will start skinnying up because that's where they reserve their fat. So the roommate in the winter and actually use that fat, in the reproduction season as well. So if I see an animal, a leopard gecko, that has a skinny tail, I know right away it's probably not eating. If it's with other animals, I pull it out right away. If it's by itself, I know there's a problem in the enclosure somewhere. Something's wrong, and it's probably 99.9999% of the time, it's probably because the heater went off out. I get a lot of questions. I probably get 20 questions a day. And I would say probably my number one question is either my crested gecko isn't eating, or my leopard gecko was eating and now it's not. And the first thing I ask the person to check is the heat. Leopard geckos need that. Again, temperature gradients.
Mm-hmm.
Leopard geckos need that at least about 20 to 25% of their enclosure to be in the low 90s.
And that's
The
belly
rest
heat,
of
or doesn't
what's
it?
that?
Is that belly heat, or doesn't have to be belly heat?
It should be belly heat. A lot of people keep the top heat, and I don't. I personally, and again, you go on Facebook and you might get some people say that it has to be belly heat. Some people say that it has to be top. I say it's heat is heat. If you have a top source, you're heating a rock or some part of the enclosure. The leopard gecko is going to know that this is what they do in nature. Guide yourself with what you do by what happens in nature. That leopard gecko is going to find the heat. It's going to warm itself up. Its metabolism is going to kick in, and it's going to find the food and eat the food. If they don't have that heat, their metabolism doesn't naturally warm up, and they just don't. That feeding instinct just doesn't kick in.
Oh, very interesting. Now, I want to share something with everybody and hoping you can see it. This is something that I went into my bioactive enclosure.
Guys, is that a baby crested gecko?
And I don't know if anybody can see this. Now, there's a crested gecko. I thought this was a mourning gecko at first because she's about 1.5 inches big. That's a baby crested gecko in my bioactive enclosure. I am so freaking excited. That is a baby crested gecko inside, and I'm just like blown away. I'm absolutely blown away, and now I don't know what to do because I can't catch her, her, because she's so tiny and so small compared to this enclosure. It's huge. Like, how do I, or do I need to get her out of there? The father is still in that enclosure.
That looks like a mourning gecko, and for mourning geckos, you can keep them in the same enclosure. You don't
That's a
have any
mourning
issues
gecko.
whatsoever.
That's a mourning gecko.
It from I'm taking a look at it from a very small screen here, but it looks like a mourning gecko.
Well, I thought
Do
it
you
was a
feed
mourning gecko until I saw his head. Let's see if you can see it.
Oh my God, that's a baby crested gecko.
if Susie, if you can send me a picture afterwards, I can
Okay,
confirm
great.
what it is for sure.
Because
But
if it is a
mourning
mourning
geckos are kind of
gecko, if it is a mourning gecko, my mourning gecko tank is in this room, and my bioactive crested gecko enclosure is down the hall to the right in my bedroom. So
okay.
somehow or
Do
another,
you have
morning, which I'm sure they can get out because they're so tiny when they're little. But
yeah.
I was just like, I'm blown away at it. But I'll send you a picture, and then
Yeah.
knowing what do I need to do, it's going to be like, I don't want her to get hurt in there because the father. I'm thinking there's no parental care, right?
There really isn't for mourning geckos. And the cool thing about mourning geckos is, and some of your fans probably know this, is that mourning geckos are parthenogenic. So
Right,
again, 99.99999% of them are going to be females
right,
and don't need a partner to breed.
right. That's the
So
mourning geckos, right?
that's mourning geckos.
Right. What if it's a crested gecko? What, like, the mom passed away about 4 months ago, and I believe she
And
was egg bound. But now my suspicions is she laid one egg, maybe, because there's a baby in there.
could be, but I'll look at the picture
Okay.
when you send it over, but it looks like a mourning gecko because it's real long and skinny. If it's fast moving, it's
Very.
absolutely a mourning gecko. If it's a little sluggish, it's probably a crested gecko.
Okay.
And
Okay.
if you don't mind, I've got a couple of crested geckos here,
Oh,
and
yes. I'd love to see
let's.
them. Guys, we got 10 minutes until we go to Aquafunk's live stream. I am so excited about this crested gecko.
So with crested geckos,
Oh, my.
I hope you can see this. With crested geckos, somebody asked before what the best beginner gecko is, and I'm kind of curious what people are saying on your live stream.
Oh, I was supposed to look. Probably crested geckos. I would imagine that's what they're saying.
I think so too, in my mind. And again, when I do these reptile shows, I tell people, and fish reptile shows or fish shows are different than reptile shows. In reptile shows, it's just sales, vendors and sales of animals. But in these reptile shows, I tell people the best animal to start with is, I almost missed that. I looked up at the camera right at the wrong time, but I think it's crested geckos because they don't need any special lighting. They don't need any special heat. We talked about the heat for the leopard geckos. They don't need live food. You can feed what's called a crested gecko diet, and a lot of places sell it. It's like a powder that you mix with water. No light, no special lighting, no special heat. The powdered diet, they're super easy to handle. I've never had any health issues with crested geckos. The only thing with crested geckos, the only drawback to a crested gecko, I'm trying to get it to jump here. This is one of our red females, but the only thing with crested geckos is they possibly, sorry about all this motion. The only thing with crested geckos is that they could lose this prehensile tail and it doesn't go back.
Yeah, they call those monkey butts, right?
Frog butts, monkey butts, yep. You can see it grabbing onto me here. It's pretty cool.
Oh, it's
So,
absolutely, and I love their paws, pads. They just stick to the glass.
yes, they'll walk right up the side of an enclosure.
So Zen said a gecko that doesn't need a partner. She had no idea that reptile existed. That's a mourning gecko, right?
The other one that you showed, I think, is a mourning gecko.
Okay. So they don't need a partner. They can just clone themselves. And I think somebody in the chat said a Komodo dragon also, dragon layer said Komodo dragon can do that also.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
Wow, that's
one
awesome.
More crested gecko, maybe. So
wow.
Females.
So
this
Candy, before you open that one, Candy's son has a crested gecko, and he doesn't like the powdered food. He likes like crickets. Is there any suggestions on how to get him over to easier food?
This is I should have paid you to ask that question, Susie. This is, everybody has their hot spots. In the aquatic world, I'm sure somebody will say, oh, you can't feed tropheus live foods, you have to feed, and somebody else will definitively come on and say, you can feed tropheus live foods. If anybody doesn't know what tropheus is, it's a algae grazing cichlid from Lake Tanganyika.
Okay.
So you get that back and forth. Now, you can feed tropheus live foods, and you absolutely can get that crested gecko to eat insects. You can feed the crested gecko diet, and it's a good it's a great food for them, and that will keep them healthy, but they really need the protein to get the crested geckos to grow a little bit faster, a little bit healthier. And I have a video titled Your Crested Gecko Won't Eat Insects. I'm calling BS.
Ooh. So what Candy is saying is her crested gecko does eat insects and doesn't eat the other kind of food. Is it missing something in her diet?
Nanette's saying that same thing to me right now. She's saying, Wally, you dummy. He's saying the opposite thing. If you're crested, and that's a problem people have, if your crested is eating all kinds of insects, dubias or crickets or mealworms or whatever, and you want to feed the powder because it does have all the calcium and vitamins, all the supplements in it, what you can do, here's a little trick, what you can do is absolutely keep that food in, but pull those insects out of the enclosure for some time. Now, some people will say, well, I did that for 2 days and the crested gecko still won't eat the diet. I'm going to tell you, in nature, they go a long time without eating. Okay. Sometimes they can't find food for 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 days.
Oh, wow.
I'm not suggesting to keep food away from your animal for 10 days. What I'm suggesting is give it more than a couple of days. Put the diet in there, pull them off of the food. But even before you do that, here's a cool trick that you can try. Take the crested gecko diet, take a deli cup, a fruit fly deli cup, put the crickets or dubias or mealworms, whatever you're feeding there. Take crested gecko diet, put it into the cup and stir it around like you're dusting those insects. Set a calcium, but with the crested gecko diet, it's not taste that they're looking for. And the person can message me on Facebook or YouTube, and we can talk through this. But because there's a couple of other things, but about foods that they're feeding. But if you get them smelling that aroma and instinctively, feed them with it, the insects dusted with that crested gecko diet, they'll start associating that crested gecko diet more with what they're normally eating.
So it's Candy Overhaul, and she did try it for a week, but I that's not feeding the actual bugs. But I don't know if she tried like dusting it with like it was calcium or something. Wow. So now is it
Yeah,
like my parrot? Now I can't get my parrot to eat salad. So what I do is I hide her treat inside salad, so she has to at least get the salad on her beak to get to her treat, and then to kind of get her used to it a little bit. Is it kind of like the same thing?
it's exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. And as they get more and more associated with that cricket tasting like the food, or better yet, smelling like the
Mm-hmm.
food, they should start eating that food. But a week's a long time. I'm kind of surprised that it didn't
Yeah.
start taking the crested diet. And again, the person can message me because maybe the diet is a little bit too runny or too not wet enough, or there might be a different issue,
I
and we
know
can
I
talk
have
about
7 different flavors of the crested gecko powder. Maybe it's a flavor thing. I don't know. But it's
it. Yeah,
Candy with an I. And she is the most amazing moderator of the All Fish
uh,
Tube, just saying.
outstanding.
Yeah,
Message
yeah,
me.
yeah.
There is a solution. We can work it together.
Now, do you have another animal there?
Yeah, I do. I have
Woo!
two animals. Just really, really quick, Susie. I know time's running out
We're
here.
good. We got 3 minutes and 27 seconds, man.
I could do that. This is
Oh,
a Dalmatian. Now, we used to
ooh.
take another gecko called Speckles to reptile shows, and I bet you Speckles, I could leave Speckles out on the
Oh,
table
speckles.
and play with him. This one is poppy seed. We lost Speckles, unfortunately, a few years ago, but Speckles went to, I bet you 5,000 people held Speckles over the time that we
Wow.
kept. And now we have poppy seed. So we're hoping that this is
Oh.
now our new mascot. Very handleable, as you can
And
see.
I know they're very easy to sex because you can't miss it when the males drop their balls. It's like it's right there on the glass. It's like
There you go. I'm going to bring out one more animal real quick just for your
yeah.
benefits. I know you love bugs. So we keep isopods, we keep all kinds of different stuff. I feel like I know a little bit about feeder insects, but recently we got into another animal here, and I'll pull it out. And the cool thing is that our granddaughter, I thought she would be afraid of this animal. It's not a tarantula, it's not a centipede, but I will ask your fans, do your fans know the difference between a centipede and a millipede? And we'll watch what people say about that
If it's
as I
anything
pull
like
this
the metric system, there's
out.
like 10 decimeters in a centimeter. There's 10 centimeters in a millimeter. Oh wow.
So
Oh.
this is a plain
Oh.
leg
That's a pet,
millipede.
right? That's a pet.
This is a pet.
Oh.
And this is the coolest thing. So this is a millipede. The difference between the centipede and millipede is millipedes have more legs, centipedes have fewer. But more
What?
importantly is that, and I bet you somebody mentioned this, centipedes can sting you, and they are venomous. Now
Centipedes are venomous.
centipedes are venomous, so you don't want to handle a centipede. But these millipedes are just the coolest thing. I don't know if this is coming over on the chat here, but just the coolest little thing. So I'm working with about 5 or 6 different species of millipedes. Some, if anybody knows what the African gigas millipede is, it's about as long as my forearm and hand together. But most of my millipedes are about this size, and just the coolest little animals. I'm
So
starting to
you
get
said
babies.
centipedes were venomous. Do they bite?
Yes, they do.
Did you get
So
that? Did you get that? Who asked that question? Barbara. Centipedes bite.
centipedes bite. So centipedes are insectivores. and I'm losing the word in my mind, but millipedes eat the decaying wood and leaves just like isopods.
Wow, look at that beauty. I guess it could kind of grow on you. Ugh, not on me though.
Okay, so that's my goal. Is the next time we meet, I'm going to bring this millipede, and you're going to handle it.
Oh, okay. Well, there's a lot of people in the chat that want you to come back, so you got to tell me you're going to come back to the stream sometime.
Oh, this was fun. I love it.
Yay! Well, right now we are going to head over to Aquafunk because he has an amazing stream coming up. I think we're all going to learn how to make money in the fish keeping hobby. We just got to show on over to Aquafunk. I think the link is in the description. Oh, it was so good to see everybody in the chat. Thank you so much. What is a xylivore? Xylivor. Xylivore. Oh, yeah, the hell you say, Susie, is right. Oh, hell no. This chicken not touching one of them. Even my dubia roaches I use. Ugh. Anyway, we're going to head over to Aquafunks and we will continue this next week. Thanks, everybody, and I'm going to end it with my song.
Hey everybody, it's Susie Q and I'm here to show you just what I do. I have a passion for fish and exotics too, so come along with me, it's Susie Q. Hey everybody, it's Susie Q and I'm here to show you just what I do. I got a passion for fish and exotics too, so come along with me, it's Susie Q. Hey everybody, it's Susie Q and I'm here to show you just what I do. I have a passion for fish and exotics too, so come along with me, it's Susie Q. Hey everybody, it's Susie Q. Hey everybody, it's Susie Q. Nah, hey everybody, it's Susie Q, so come along with me. Said I'm Susie Q.